Hey, welcome. All these games you see running on the screen right now are using basically the exact same movement and collision engine with very minor tweaks to get super different results, but the core of these games is exactly the same, and that's exactly what I'm going to show you how to make in this series. Over these 9 videos, we're going to cover the basic logic for a 2D platformer, so pixel precise collisions and basic jumping, controlling the height of your jump, adding optional double, triple, quadruple jumping, whatever, and input buffering. There's a sort of optional video in here about making a simple camera system, pretty unrelated to platforming, but I figured it'd be good to have here anyways. Coyote time, holding a button to run or sprint, including sprite control, and also free basic character sprite pack for you. Slopes, all kinds of slopes, semi-solid platforms and moving semi-solid platforms, moving rectangular solid platforms, and you'll be able to get super crazy with the movement of all of these moving platforms. You'll be able to do literally whatever you want. And lastly, basic crouching mechanics, because most 2D platformers have some kind of crouching mechanic. So yeah, I would say this engine basically covers about 85% of every single platformer ever. And so as a jumping off point from this series, I'll also be making branching series that'll be things like how to make a platformer that's more precision and momentum based, like a Mario game, how to make a Metroidvania style game, how to make like an action platformer. And the idea is those series will just start from exactly where this series left off. So that was kind of my intent behind this. Quick little note, in the beginning of 2022, there was a big update to how collisions work in GameMaker, and this system obviously works with those collision changes that they made in the beginning of 2022. So just make sure that your version of GameMaker is from 2022 or newer, which it probably is if you're watching this video. And by default, this should be unchecked, but if it's not, you can check in your general game options and uncheck the collision compatibility mode option. That was basically just an option that they added for projects before 2022, where changing the collision system might have messed them up. So if you have this checked, it's the old collision system. So uncheck it so it's the new collision system. Chances are you're probably already fine. I also want to mention that a long time ago, whenever I was learning game development and I was learning how to use GameMaker and all that kind of stuff, I utilized Sean Spalding videos a lot. So the general idea behind the precise collisions and the slopes especially are things that I learned from watching Sean Spalding. Fantastic channel. You've probably seen their videos before, but if not, it's an excellent resource for learning GameMaker and has been for a long time now. However, I just personally wanted to put out there a really good series that, like I said, covers the main true core of a platformer, including things like really complex moving platforms and solid moving platforms and things like that. And I wanted to have it all in one place instead of scattered in different videos, which trying to learn that way in my own experience could cause a lot of confusion. Systems could conflict with each other. And this way you'll be learning from start to finish while keeping all of these systems in mind. That's the idea anyways. So I'm really hoping you learn something, but more than anything, I'm kind of just hoping to give you an engine that you can use and you can tweak how you want to for your commercial games and stuff like that. This is all just knowledge, you know, none of this is none of this code or concepts or copyright or anything like that. So yes, you can absolutely use this in your commercial games. A lot of people ask me that. It's best you don't use the sprites that I'm going to give you in part 5 in a commercial game, but yeah, this is just code. This is just a basic engine. So if you like it, please use it in your games. Now this series does eventually get into some more advanced stuff, especially once we get to the moving platforms and stuff like that. So if you are brand new to GameMaker, like this is the first thing you're looking up basically, please watch my How to Make an RPG tutorial series first instead. I do things like walk you through the UI of GameMaker. I explain how things work, what coding is, what the different events are, all that kind of stuff. You should have some very basic knowledge going into this series, but like always, I try and explain everything as I go along, all the reasoning behind it and what everything is doing. So you should be able to follow along at any level, but just letting you know that as the series goes on, it does get a little bit more complicated, and it could be something that you eventually want to come back to in the future, or you may find yourself deciding you don't want to have moving platforms and stuff like that, which is totally fine. If you're watching these as they come out, then you also can go to my Patreon if you want to. All 8 parts are up on my Patreon already, so you can get those early. And at the $10 tier, you can actually just download this project file if you want to. If that makes it easier for you to follow along, then that's great. I would definitely prefer that you walk through with the series so you understand everything that's happening, but at the very least, you can download it and walk through the series to understand how to tweak it, and then you can just use that project file as a basis for a game if you want to. But again, you only benefit by going through and listening to the explanations and learning from it. But do whatever you want. Oh, and lastly, this game right here is actually my own commercial game that's going to be coming out this year. So if you want to help me out, you can wishlist that on Steam. There's a link below. Or if it's out, you can just buy it, which would be great. Okay, long intro's over. Sorry about that. I just needed to set the stage properly. So now you're ready. All right, good luck to you. All right, let's freaking get started. Okay, all I have here is a basically totally empty project. I got rid of all the default folders. I changed the filtering of the asset tree to custom order so I can drag things around. There's a default room that GameMaker gave me. And basically, I've just made two very simple sprites and two objects to go with them. A player and a wall. There is no code in the objects right now. So really quick, let me just show you how I set up my player sprite. It's just a 16 by 16 sprite, made it a big solid color, nice pink, and I put the origin at the bottom center, because this is kind of going to be at the bottom middle of the player, like at the player's feet, basically. And just a quick little note about this system, it is extremely important that you have the Y origin point at the bottom of the collision mask like you're seeing here. It's not that you couldn't do this if the origin point was somewhere in the center of your collision mask or whatever, but just the way that I do everything is based on this, and there's a couple places that would need tweaks if you weren't to do that. So just for the sake of following through with this video, I would do that if I were you. So yeah, carry on. It's kind of the most logical way to do this for a 2D platformer. The collision mask is the full image here. I have it set to manual over here, but obviously you can do automatic. It should be the same thing. And then I also have a 16 by 16 sprite for our wall. And I just made it look like this, added grids, because one, it looks cool. Looks really prototypey if you use the 9 slice here, which I have activated. So I have activated my 9 slice. I select my middle thing, set the tile mode to repeat instead of stretch. So in the room editor and in game, it's gonna do this instead of just do this instead of this. So yeah, looks pretty cool. Also, whenever we actually start moving the camera around and running the player around and stuff like that later, it will be nice to have an actual gridded thing like this, so we have reference point for how fast the player's going and where they're moving and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so there's a reason that people use the gridded stuff, so we're just going to use it. Other than that, it's the same thing with the collision mask. It's the full image here, and that will stretch with our object when we stretch it out. And also the origin point in the top left makes it much easier to use in the room editor. Then I came over here, right click, created objects for each one, opened up the objects, named it O wall for the wall, selected my sprite, O player for the player, selected my player. As I mentioned in the intro, you can kind of tell by me wanting to get right into things with this one. I would say that the first couple episodes of the series are going to be beginner friendly. However, I want to go a little bit faster because by the end of this little series, this is a really good basis for any type of platformer game. So by the nature of the stuff that we're including, this is going to be a little bit more advanced than straight up beginner. Again, these first couple episodes will be useful to you if you do consider yourself to be a beginner. However, if this is the very first thing you're trying to do in GameMaker, if this is like the first tutorial you're watching, I probably wouldn't recommend that. I'd probably recommend you watch my How to Make an RPG series, because it is for legitimate beginners who've never even used GameMaker before. So again, feel free to stick with this. Just if you find it going a little bit too fast at some point, or it seems like I'm glossing over kind of basic things, then just go watch that other series, watch other videos from other people. It's always great to get different teachers so you can get different perspectives on learning, all that kind of stuff. Okay, moving on, let's get programming. So we have our empty player object and our empty wall object. The great news is the wall object is not going to have to do literally anything at this point. All of the collision and behaviors regarding our interactions with the player and the wall together are calculated by the player. So all the walls are going to have to do in the game is just sit there. So we're not going to need to mess with that at all. And let's start with our player object. So what we're doing in this first episode is basically just basic movement, colliding with walls and, using gravity to basically make it a 2D platformer, and basic jumping. Very easy. We're not even going to worry about sprites yet. So let's just start with our create event, right? Set up some variables. So I'm just going to call this first bit of code moving. Very simple. First, we want to figure out what direction we're going to be trying to move in, left, right, or no direction. So let's have a variable called move direction and set it equal to 0, or move dir. So -1 will be moving left, 0 is not moving at all, and 1 will be moving to the right. Very easy. Then I want to determine what is the actual speed we want to move at. So how many pixels per frame? And we're going to call that move speed. And by default, I'm going to set that to 2. And then to actually perform our movement and basically our final speeds, we are going to have an X speed variable and a Y speed variable. X speed will obviously be our left and right speed along the X axis, and our Y speed will be up and down. So that'll interact with our gravity and our jumping and stuff like that. And speaking of which, we can go ahead and set up our jumping variables. Like I said, first of all, we need a gravity value, right? And I'm just going to call it grav, and I'm going to set that to 0.275. This number could literally be anything. Like I said, our movement speed speed for going left and right, that's going to be how many pixels per frame we move left and right whenever we're trying to move. This is the same principle. This is how many pixels we're going to be adding to our Y speed to make it go downwards and go faster. So that'll be 0.275 pixels per frame. That may seem like a very specific number, but again, this could be any number. This is just the number that I ultimately arrived on. You obviously want it to be pretty small because you want it to be a subtle change. You don't want the player to drop like a rock. And this is just a good number I found. Around like 0.3, 0.25, I've always found to be good feeling kind of gravity numbers, depending on your game and anything like that. So anyways, that's just the one that I set it at. Next, we're going to have a terminal velocity, so term vel. And that basically just means how fast can the player actually fall. You know, like I said, we're going to be adding 0.275 every frame to our Y speed to make the player go downwards. That's basically, you know, acting like how gravity does. But if the player falls for a long time, we don't want them to like really rack up speed. That feels pretty weird in a game. And so pretty much all games have a cap on the fastest you can fall. And I found normally around like 4, 5, or 6 pixels per second to be pretty good. I'm going to use 4 for this one just because it'll be the easiest to test because it's the, you know, it'll be the lowest speed that you can fall at. But yeah, I'm going to say 4 pixels per second is the fastest our player should be able to fall down as far as the effects of gravity go. So cool. Now I want to make a variable called J speed, which stands for jumping speed. This is another one that I kind of fine-tuned a little bit myself, but the main thing is that this needs to be a negative value, and I'll explain that in a second. So I'm going to say the default is negative 3.15 pixels per second. Again, it doesn't have to be that precise, but the idea is it does need to be negative because we know that in GameMaker going upwards is negative on the y-axis. The y-axis actually points downwards in GameMaker. So if you want the player to jump up, you need them to jump negatively. So yeah, very simple. And I think that's about as complex as we're going to get for the first episode. So now let's actually manipulate all these numbers. Let's go to our step event and let's start with our left and right movement. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is get some inputs so we can actually do stuff in our game, right? So the main important ones for our movement are going to be our right and left keys to move. So I'm going to create a variable called right key, and I'm going to set that equal to keyboard check, and that's going to be VK right. That's an arrow key. Don't worry, I'm going to show you how to do WASD, and I'm also going to show you how to do controller at the end of the video. But for now, let's just do this for simplicity's sake. So keyboard check is a function that looks for a key, which right now we're passing in GameMaker's built-in value for the right arrow key on a keyboard. And so basically what this means is if our right arrow key is being pressed, keyboard check returns 1. And if it isn't being pressed, it returns 0, which is then stored in our right key. And we'll talk about how we can use that in a second. So I'm just also going to do left key here. So I'm setting left key equal to keyboard check VK left. Same principle. If the left key is being pressed, this returns a positive 1. And if it's not, it returns a 0. And then we're saving it in this variable. These are underlined in yellow because GameMaker doesn't like that these are regular variables and that I didn't declare them in the create event first, but don't worry because we're going to move this code at some point and it works just fine this way. This isn't an actual error. GameMaker's just telling me that I'm sloppy and bad and stupid. So we got some inputs and now we can get our movement, right? And first we want to do our X movement. And the first thing we need to get with our X movement is our direction. So our movedir variable. And we can do that like this. Like I said, our right key is either a 0 or a 1 based on if we're pressing the button, and same with our left key. So we can actually do this. It's really cool. We can do right key minus left key. So essentially, if we're pressing our right key and not our left key, we get 1 minus 0 equals 1. So our move direction will be positive 1. If neither of these are being pressed, or both of them are being pressed, that's either 0 minus 0 or 1 minus 1, which means movedir becomes 0. So we shouldn't be moving in a direction. And if our left key is being pressed, we get 0 minus 1. That equals negative 1. So we're trying to negatively move on the x-axis, which is moving to the left, right? Maybe I shouldn't say right directly after that. We're moving to the left if it's negative 1, right? I did it again. Old habits die hard. Listen, kid, you know what I'm saying. Now that we know the direction, we can go down here and we can say get our X speed. And so we can set our X speed variable to be our moving direction, which is either negative 1, 0, or 1, and just multiply that times our movement speed. So if we're pressing left, this will become negative 2 because it's negative 1 times our move speed. If we're pressing right, it becomes positive 2. If we're not pressing anything, it stays at 0. So now we have how fast we should be moving left and right. And the last thing we need to do before we can actually move our player left and right by this amount of X speed is we want to make sure there aren't any walls in our way. So we want to add collisions basically. So this is going to be our X collision. It's a little bit bigger. There we go. And so here's how we're going to do that. We're going to do this and make sure that our player can always scoot right up to the wall and not leave gaps. So first, let's declare a local variable. I'm going to call this var subpixel. Okay, and this is going to be how close we can get to a wall. And I'm calling it subpixel because I'm going to use 0.5 for this because I want it to be pretty precise. Oftentimes, a pixel art game that you make in GameMaker or something like that, a lot of times the resolution of your art and the logic of the game will not actually be the same resolution as the display of your game. You probably noticed this with many indie games before, but that basically just means that your player can actually move into subpixels, but visually you can also see, right? Like all the pixels don't match up is basically what I'm saying. And even if they did, I'm kind of using this number because I just want it to be very precise. And as we get along in the series, you'll see that a lot of the little details are pretty important for the final product, essentially. And so if I were you, don't worry about it, just do 0.5 pixels. So now that I've pre-explained all of that, let me actually show you what we even do with this in the first place. So we want to check if there's a wall in the way. So if place meeting, we're going to check our X position plus where we want us to be, which is plus our X speed, current Y position, and we're just going to check for a wall. Easy peasy. So normally what we would do here is just immediately set our X speed to be 0, right? Because down here is going to be where we move. So down here is going to be X plus equals our X speed. So if our X speed is, say, +2 right here, basically we're checking 2 pixels ahead of us to see if there is a wall object in the way. If there is, we set our X speed to be 0, so the player will not move into the wall, and then we calculate our movement, which basically means as long as there is not a wall in the way, we will move forward by our X speed. But if there is something in the way, we'll set it to 0, which basically makes us not move, which is essentially a collision. And this works totally fine, but like I said, it's not precise. Our X speed is 2, so if there is a wall only 1 pixel ahead of us, and technically there, we should be able to move forward 1 pixel without running into the wall, we'll still stop 2 pixels before the wall because that's how far ahead we're checking. We're not checking for in between here. So right here, this was set X speed to 0 to collide. However, before we set our X speed to 0. This is extremely important that we do this before we set it to 0, so add some space up here. We're going to say scoot up to wall precisely. Precisely. So I'm gonna add a local variable and I'm gonna call this var pixel check. And this is going to be our subpixel, but it's gonna be multiplied times the sine of our X speed. And what sine does is it just tells us whether the value that we pass in is either negative, positive, or it's neither. So it's 0. So sine returns -1, 0, or +1. It's basically just reverse engineering our move direction from our X speed. Now, the reason we use sine of X speed instead of using like move direction or something like that right here, like I said, that would technically be the same thing right now, but let's say way down the line, you're getting pretty complicated with your movement code, and maybe something after you get your move direction alters this X speed variable to the point where maybe your X speed ends up not being the same as your move direction variable. Well, then using movedir down here wouldn't give us the right value we need because we need to be checking for the direction the X speed is actually moving. So we're using sine of X speed versus move direction. It's just kind of the smartest thing to do right now. So anyways, what this is doing is basically it's just taking the direction that we're moving, and now we're checking ahead in those subpixel increments. So again, X plus say 2, there's a wall in the way. If that's the case, okay, well now we're gonna check instead of, just 2 ahead. We know that there is a wall 2 ahead of us. So now we just wanna check in increments of 0.5 pixels to look for a wall. So we can say while there is not a place meeting of our X plus that new increment that we have, so our new pixel check with our current Y position in an object wall. So again, if there's not a wall in the way yet, then we can just start scooting our X forward by that pixel check amount. And what while does instead of if is while acts as a loop. So basically this line of code will continue to run until it's no longer true. And we won't progress past this point in the code until we have run into the wall. That's, 0.5 pixels ahead of us. It's okay, we can do this as a loop because we know that eventually we will run into the wall because we've already confirmed that at least 2 pixels ahead of us right now, or whatever our X speed is, there is a wall. So basically the farthest our X increment can move up is 2 pixels, or, most likely 1.5 pixels before it will be running into a wall anyways. I just wanted to say really quick, because I forgot to mention, the reason it was important that we put this before our X speed is, as I mentioned, we have to use our X speed to determine which direction we need to, scoot ourselves up to the wall. So if we had done this after we set our X speed to 0, then our loop right here would never terminate because there would be no direction to push our player until we ran into a wall, right? So our game would freeze because that while loop would never exit. So anyways, just wanted to mention that. It's almost like what we're doing, you know, another way you could achieve this is by shaving off subpixels from our X speed while we're running into a wall. You know, there's different ways to do this, but this will get us the desired effect. But anyways, I'm just going to tab all this out here just so I know it's all under X movement. And if we want to, we can go ahead and test that before we add anything else. And I think that is a great idea. Also, just to make sure I didn't mess anything up. So let's go into our room. Let me show you my room settings really quick, my room camera settings. So if I were you, I would follow kind of closely to what I'm doing. But, you know, just make sure you've set everything up well. I'm doing 480 pixels by 270. So 480 wide, 270 high. That is exactly 1/4 of 1080p. And if I'm to go up here in my grid settings and change it to 16 by 16, this is about the screen space you're going to see as far as tiles are concerned. And I think this is a pretty good amount of screen real estate while also not being, you know, like super zoomed out or anything like that. So I use this for my games. But anyways, you know, 480 by 270, go to viewports cameras, make sure your viewport is enabled, make sure your viewport 0 is visible, camera properties, 480 by 270, viewport properties, which is the size of the window. I did 960 by 540. That is double the resolution of my game, and it's half the size of my monitor, which is a 1080p monitor. If you have a 4K monitor, you might want to change this to 1920 by 1080, and that'll fill up half of your screen. But other than that, that's it. So there's no Y speed right now, no gravity. So I'm going to add my player in right here. My player will not fall or go up and down. So if I want to, just for visual sake, I can add a floor, but it won't really be doing anything at all. What I'm really testing is running into walls to the left and the right like this. So let's just run our game and check it out. Okay. My player is moving and look at that. Colliding and looking very snug right there. Now, there's a good chance that our player is just moving at the perfect speed and will, you know, never have to do the super precise collision part of things, but we can just easily test that. I can go and change my movement speed to, let's do like 3.5, or we can even do something like high, like we can do like 5.5, right? And this should be the same effect that we get. Yeah, see, we still get snug in that corner. And do something really weird. Let me do like 5.123. See how that does. Yep. Nice and snug in the corner, no matter how weird our movement speed is. So awesome. And just for the sake of zooming with you guys, I'm actually going to increase the size of my window to be the size of my screen. Okay, so yeah, and looking good. So our X stuff works. If your X stuff seems a little funky, something's not right, it's not working the right way, you're not moving correctly, you just need to check all of this again. It's very important. Make sure you're getting your inputs correctly. Make sure you're getting your move direction correctly. Same with the X speed. Check your collisions again, and make sure you added the, you know, code to actually move your character. So with that out of the way, let's add our Y movement now. And I'm going to add some space. Okay, so Y movement. First things first, gravity. Let's just always add gravity to our Y speed like this, right? That's how gravity works on you. It's how gravity works on me. It's how gravity works on my grandma. It's always active. It's going to be the same for our player. We're going to get a little bit more nuanced with this a little bit later, but that is going to be the principle for this whole thing. Also, completely slipped my mind to actually mention in this video. I do it in the next video, but I might as well add it here too. Our terminal velocity. We set it up and I forgot to add it in. It's very simple. We're adding gravity to our Y speed every single frame, which is how gravity acts in real life, like I said. But now we can just say if our Y speed becomes greater than our terminal velocity, then we can just hard set our Y speed to be our terminal velocity, right? Just don't let it ever go above it. That's it. And so that'll give us a nice little smooth fall down. Pretty much every single game ever has a maximum terminal velocity. Some are high, some are lower, but yeah, you can go ahead and add that in if you want, or you can wait until I add it in like part 2 or 3 or something else. So easy. We want our gravity to press down on us at all times, but we also want to be able to jump. And this is very easy. The two conditions currently that we want to have for jumping in pretty much any kind of game like this is, are we already on the ground? And did we press a button to jump, right? So we can check for both of those things. So before we start with it, let's add a button for jumping. Let's add a new input. We'll call this jump key. And we're going to call this jump key pressed. And here's why, because we're going to use a slightly different keyboard function called keyboard check pressed. And let's just use our space bar like this, right? So keyboard check basically returns if a button is being held. So anytime I'm pressing the right button here, the right arrow key, it's returning a 1 for right key. However, the pressed function only checks for the first frame that a button was pressed, right? Makes sense. So we only want to look for the moment that that button was input, not whether it's being held, because otherwise the player could just hold down the jumping button and any single time the player would tap the ground, they would immediately automatically jump without the player having to input anything. It's not that that would be a bad thing to have in a game at all. It's just not what we're trying to do right now. And eventually we are going to be getting the regular jump key, like so the holding version of it. So we're going to have to get jump key equals keyboard check VK space or whatever. So that's why I like to, naming wise, add the pressed to these variables where I'm checking for this, because sometimes you're going to have to be looking for both for different things. So anyways, jump key pressed equals keyboard check pressed VK space. So first we want to check if our jump key pressed was pressed, right? And like I said, this will either be returning a 0 or a 1. It will be returning a 1 on the frame that it's pressed. And so you could say if jump key pressed is equal to 1 or it's equal to true, then do this. Or you can just say if jump key pressed. It all does the same thing. So if our button has been pressed and if there's a wall under us, right? We're standing on the ground. So for now, we can just do that by very simply checking if there is a wall at our X coordinate. And remember, the Y axis shoots downwards in GameMaker. So to check below us, we need to check our current Y position plus 1 pixel, and we check for a wall. And that's basically checking here. It's basically moving our player down 1 pixel to, well, there we go. Basically moving our player down 1 pixel to check if there is a wall there. And if there is, that means we're standing on the ground, so we should be able to jump. Easy. So if both of those things are true, then we can set our Y speed to be our jump speed. You can just immediately set it there. And again, our jump speed is negative. So that will start moving our player upwards, right? Cool, cool. So now we need to move on to our Y collision, and it's going to work exactly the same as our X collision. So I'm going to get our subpixel here. I'm gonna set that equal to 0.5 again. Say if place meeting our current X position plus where we want our Y speed to take us with a wall. Then first we're going to do the scoot up to the wall precisely. We're doing the same thing here, except this time our pixel check is going to be our subpixel times the sign of our Y speed, which is the direction of our Y speed. Oh my god. All right. And then while there is not a place meeting of our current X position and our Y plus our little pixel check with a wall, and then we can just add that pixel check to our Y value. There we go. Precise movement up to the wall. Then we just have to set our Y speed to 0 to collide. Y speed equals 0, so we won't move forward anymore. And then we just want to move. So Y plus equals our Y speed. Very easy. So we should always be falling downwards if we're in the air, basically, because if we're on the ground like this, then we won't move anymore. And if we're on the ground and we press the jump key, then we can jump, which I'm actually not sure what this J speed will look like with this current version of it, but let's just test it. And I'll explain what I mean by that in a second. So, oh yeah, that's really low. Very, very low jump. But it is working. So yeah, it's working exactly like how you think it should. If you want to, you can crank up that J speed just to test it a little bit. Let's just like almost double it right there. And that'll probably give us a pretty good, oh yeah. Oh baby. Yeah, very nice. So that's the basics of a platformer right there for you. Hey, nice job making it to the end. Next time we're going to improve our jumping controls, add like double jumping, things like that, input buffering. It's going to be great. Like I said in the intro, if you're watching these as they come out and the next part's not out yet, you can get it right now on Patreon. And remember, you can download the actual full finished project file from Patreon as well. It supports this channel. It also just supports me and making my games, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'd appreciate it if you checked it out. And remember, look at these two. Wow, these are 2 games I'm working on. Starcross Starcade Special is coming out this year, so you can subscribe to keep up with when that's coming out. And Rosa Starcross is going to come out a little bit later. It's a full RPG kind of thing. There's trailers for both on this channel. You can watch them if you want to. I'll link them below, or maybe they're on screen at the very end. I don't know. Also, you can join the Patreon as a free member if you want to keep up with my videos and my games. I would really appreciate that, like a lot. And speaking of Patreon, I gotta give some shout outs to some very cool people like Nixionic, Null, Joseph Sandlin, Midnight, AOGO, Christian Donovan, DT, Richard DeLuca, Arya Sparks, Maya, Roble, Crazy Poo Chucker, Harrison, Joshua, Takuni, Ruben Leoville, Moody, Mikael Alexander, or maybe Michael Alexander, sorry about that, David Rivas, NerdBoutique.com, Carlos Acosta, John Brown, Pixel, Frog Salt, Joshua Hurry, Marco Romo, Howie, Sam Live, Andres Premel, hopefully I got that right, Bill Lottie, Ao, Amar Ali, Nick Lee, Matthew Carr, C, Mancat, Patrick, Yaskarit Brar, that was probably really wrong, but here we are, Dean Blackborough, and Odessi. Wow, that's a lot of people. So thank you guys so much. It really means the world to me. It helps me out more than you know, and helps me stay on top of the channel as much as I can. So you guys are the best. Okay, well, that's that. Yeah, congratulations on getting through the first video. Hope you learned something. Definitely keep going through them. Like I said, this is a really cool system. Put a lot of work into it, so I would really like it if you watched them. But yeah, any more housekeeping? No, that's probably it. Just subscribe, ring bell, whatever, so you can hear about my games and my new videos, all tutorials, things. Sometimes I just make random videos. Support me on Patreon if you want. Feel free to say something mean in the comments if you want, or nice, or completely third-party neutral in the comments. That's fine too. Yeah. See you in the next one. Have a good day.